I think the first issue really is to define what do we mean by universal basic income guarantee. Universal obviously means that everybody's entitled to a grant, and that while it is universal, it's targeted in reality at people below a certain income, but using the tax clawbacks as a mechanism rather than the means testing form of targeting. Secondly, basic is that it is a flaw which aims to provide people with basic subsistence, which they can supplement with other forms of activity. Income means a regular monthly amount indexed to an objective measure of need, for example, a poverty line. And a guarantee means it's a guaranteed right. It's not a welfare grant, which is extended to only those that the government deemed to be deserving. Therefore, it's unconditional, independent of your employment status, etc. Next, really to say, is the UBIG revolutionary or reformist? You know, a lot of conservative elements also talk about their purported support for a UBIG. The demand for a UBIG is clearly not a revolutionary one, but it is potentially radical, particularly in the current context. While not a silver bullet, it has significant potential to push the boundaries of the possible and to be a step towards a reimagination of our economies for reasons that I'll explain later. Despite this, the campaign for a UBIG is controversial in certain progressive circles because of the fear, given its support by some conservatives such as Friedman, that it will replace public services, undermine workers, and so on. There was an important paper by Isabel Ortiz from the ILO in 2018, who set out a number of potential negatives a UBIG would need to avoid, namely, firstly, that it was set at an inadequate level, that it would be budget neutral, i.e. come at the expense of other social spending, that it would be funded by regressive taxation, which means that it's not redistributive. Fourthly, that it would not be accompanied by public provisioning of basic services. And fifthly, not supported by broad societal consensus or rooted in sound, transparent legal and institutional frameworks. These concerns raised by Ortiz are important and need to be addressed. I think that in the South African context, though, we do think that it is a radical and fundamental demand and has profound economic implications as well as social implications. The reason for that is a full universal basic income guarantee cannot be realized without a reconfiguration of economic policies, particularly if it is both universal and combined with an expansion of public services. In that sense, an expansive UBIG is not compatible with austerity. It promotes domestic demand and can be radically redistributed. Because of the size of the fiscal commitment it requires, it opens up the possibility of progressive tax interventions, including a wealth tax. In the current post-COVID crisis world, it has been put on the agenda unlike previously. It's no longer an abstract idea, certainly not in South Africa. A UBIG is relevant everywhere there's economic distress, but particularly relevant in the global South, which is hit by economic precarity and more so in countries like South Africa, riddled with poverty and inequality. It has particular relevance to the current moment. It has relevance to addressing a number of aspects of our intersecting multiple crises, including deep economic hysteresis or scarring, the climate crisis and just transitions as poor communities' income is increasingly hit by climate disruptions, labor displacing technologies, and growing hunger. Because poverty and hunger affects the majority of people in countries in deep distress, such as South Africa, it is a concrete, practical demand that people can understand and support while having far-reaching social and economic implications. At the same time, much education is needed on why universality is not something that wastes resources on the rich, rather the converse is true. If you've got it up, we could connect it. I think it'd be better if people can see a couple of the graphics and so on. Further, we argue it's progressive for the working class. If it's not anti-capitalist per se, a UBIG runs counter to the logic of capitalism insofar as income is not dependent on servicing capital or promoting the dominance of finance capital, something that we've spoken about a lot in this conference. Basic income is independent of financial markets and economic cycles. In that sense, it has an element of delinking. the delinking that has been spoken about before. It potentially reinforces the power of workers, reinforces the reservation wage, combats precarity, particularly if combined with union organization and labor protection, as well as a national minimum wage floor. It reduces the economic and social devastation caused by unemployment and gives workers greater opportunities to seek a better quality of employment, engage in skills upgrading, or own economic activities. We've seen in the global north how the so-called great resignation has arisen from workers being empowered to resist or leave extreme low-wage jobs. It needs to give real income support. Obviously, the question of the level of the UBIG is very important. A level set to Okay, thanks. It may fail to have an impact on structural poverty if it does not meaningfully improve people's agency and risks institutionalizing a poverty trap and economic inequality. This is more pronounced if the UBIG comes at the expense of other social and labor protections. It uniquely recognizes and values unpaid care work and potentially liberates aspects of women's social and economic activities. A UBIG paid to all adults rather than to the heads of households, as is in the case with some family grants, supports greater independence and autonomy for women and goes somewhere. Is the mic working? Is it working? And goes somewhere towards remunerating unpaid domestic and care labor. It reduces power imbalances within the family, where it provides a caregiver financial resources and a citizenship status independent of paid employment. And it provides a wage supplement and some bargaining power to low-paid workers. It's a fundamental citizen's right. Some comrades will have heard about the Varoufakis notion of a citizen's dividends. It has the potential to be constitutionally entrenched as part of human rights law and counters demeaning and exclusionary forms of social welfare that stigmatize and exclude the poor. The notion of a citizen's dividend is based on the idea that whether or not we're employed, owners of the means of production, all members of capitalist society contribute to the wealth that society produces, including through consumption, unpaid care and domestic labor, social and generational skills, knowledge transfer, etc. In South Africa and other post-colonial societies with history of colonization, slavery, land expropriation, forced dispossession and displacement, the concept of a rightful share or dividend finds an even greater social and moral basis. Another advantage is that it is simple to administer. You don't need complex administrative systems, and therefore it's also subject to minimal corruption. Compared to other programs of government aimed at assisting the poor, grants can be rapidly implemented. Income reaches beneficiaries directly and quickly. It has a stimulus impact in poor communities, particularly in a crisis. It does not exclude the working poor, importantly, unlike a grant which is only aimed at the unemployed, but benefits all low-income working people as well as the unemployed. Together with the national minimum wage, it can significantly raise the income of unemployed and working poor households. The macroeconomic impacts of a UBIG are not limited to the value of the transfer being spent back into the economy, i.e. the 100 or 200 billion or whatever it is. There are also various multiplier effects which stem from the impacts of income support on labor supply, enterprise formation, job creation, and self-employment, which can serve to boost household incomes beyond the value of the transfer with flow-on effects in the overall economy, the multiplier effect that Busi spoke about earlier. It would be a boost for progressive movements facing attacks, demoralization, and fragmentation. It gives hope and confidence to people that they can achieve material improvement even in this period of deep crisis, where there are growing attacks on working people. It gives progressive movements an anchor among the people in the face of economic fluctuations in the way, for example, Bolsa Familia and the national minimum wage gave Lula and the PT strength in Brazil. But conversely, we also need to recognize that right-wing popular movements may move towards some form of basic income to shore up their support. And we can see currently Bolsonaro panicking in the face of the forthcoming elections is rolling out increased grants to the unemployed and others in society. There is a growing movement in the global south for a basic income, including South Africa and Latin America, and we've referred to a number of countries there. Just, one of the debates that has been raised is that we don't want a UBIG, we want a jobs guarantee. And we argue that this is a false debate. The two should not be counterposed. We should look at both public employment and UBIG as complementary interventions. So for all the reasons that I've outlined in terms of its progressive and relatively radical character, if it's adopted as a universal basic income of the character that I've spoken about, it'll be fiercely resisted by capital and conservative bureaucracies and be the subject of sharp contestation. This is already happening in South Africa. So what they are attempting to do and will attempt to do is to hollow out campaigns for a basic income and to make it tokenistic at very low level, narrowly targeted and means tested, counterposed to public services, subtract from budgets for public services, link it to coercive workfare, and fund it through regressive taxation such as VAT. For these reasons, there can be no illusion that a UBIG cannot only be achieved through the power of argument. It has to also be achieved by the argument of power through a combination of the deep social crisis which has emerged in the post-COVID period and threatened or actual upheaval like we had in South Africa in July last year and is currently bubbling under popular mobilization and organization, political engagement with policymakers, advancement of sophisticated policy proposals, and marshalling of the international evidence. So just quickly to reflect on the South African experience. Until 2020, there was no social security for adult South Africans aged 18 to 59. There was only child support grants and old age pensions, despite us having the highest levels of unemployment in the world, which now stand at 45% in the expanded definition. That's not a typo, it's 45%, accompanied by widespread poverty. Active labor market measures that address cyclical changes haven't addressed this deep structural poverty. And until now, there was a complete absence of social protection for adults excluded from economic activity. But COVID-19 crisis changed all that because in April 2020, government introduced a small grant for adults, or all adults aged 18 to 59, or rather adults without income and unemployed. And that has now subject to fierce contestation with the National Treasury trying to stop it repeatedly. We've managed to get it extended to March 2023. So it will have been in place for 3 years. It's now politically impossible for the government to reverse it. It will have to be extended after March 2023. So the question now isn't, will it continue? The question now is, will it be transformed into some form of universal basic income? And this is widely accepted in society. This is the debate in South Africa. It's the live debate, probably a bigger debate than anything else virtually, other than, together with the issues of energy in the country. So there is political resistance, but significant support. Our National Treasury have repeatedly attempted to terminate it. As I mentioned, they're terrified that it'll become a permanent entitlement, but we've managed to defeat them on that. They've tried multiple ways to sabotage the grant or advance other versions of the grant, such as a family grant, which would make a UBIG unachievable. We've also managed to defeat that. When I say we, I mean the coalition of social forces, which has been campaigning for the grant. We've had encouraging support, signs of support from the president himself and from elements within the ruling party. The ANC had a policy conference last week, and they endorsed the proposal for basic income grant. Whether it's going to be in the form of a universal basic income guarantee is now the contestation. Our meetings with the president in January, and we've got a pending meeting, were very encouraging. The ANC is split on the issue. I don't want to exaggerate the consensus on the issue. But a very significant in last week's policy conference, a very significant development was the ANC came out supporting a wealth tax to fund a basic income grant, whereas the bureaucrats in Treasury had said it can be only funded by an increase in VAT. There has been a crisis around the delivery of these grants. At the end of March, 10.9 million people were receiving grants on a monthly basis. After the state of disaster was ended, new regulations kicked in and they brought in much tighter means testing requirements as a result of pressure from National Treasury. As a result of this, the applications and the approvals have plummeted and currently are at less than half, around 5.2 million. So we're currently in a big dispute with government around this, and we're in the process. In fact, we're talking to the lawyers tonight. We're taking court action on the issue, and there's been extensive mobilization around it. I'll finish off. So although these setbacks, particularly around means testing, have been a setback for the SRD grant, it's actually a boost for universal basic income because it's shown the irrationality of means testing and targeting. The Treasury is now going to try to argue that the expense of this grant will have to be taken from other budgets, etc. I'll come back maybe in question time to the fiscal implications of this. It's a relatively small outlay at the moment, about 44 billion rand a year, which is a bit less than $3 billion a year. The issue is whether we can afford not to do it, and whether we have the resources that are coming in. The commodities boom has actually led to a tax overrun of about 250 billion rand, which is, I mean, I can say in Malaysian currency, it's about 70 billion ringgit. Compared to what was expected at the beginning of 2021. So there's a very significant resources coming in as a result of the commodities boom, which can easily finance the expansion of this grant and its conversion into basic income. We also had looting in July 2021 in Johannesburg and Durban, two of the big centers in South Africa, economic centers, which led to destruction of over 70 billion rand in businesses, way more than the cost of the COVID grant itself. So the cost of not implementing it is very, very high. And a lot of this, some of it was political, but a lot of it was food riots, where people, through sheer desperation, were looting. So the contestation is fierce and undecided. We as coalitions and trade unions and movements have engaged in mobilization, political engagement, policymakers, a lot of research and comparative international studies, court action, as I mentioned, coalitions. So the battle is underway, and the outcome is uncertain. It depend on the balance of forces in society. While the odds may be stacked against us, the combination of the social crisis, mobilization, and degree of support among key political forces creates a real possibility of some sort of progressive outcome. So the question is the prospect for a real universal basic income guarantee in South Africa a bright light in an otherwise dark terrain? And the answer is that we don't know. Time and struggle will tell. Thanks.